Gary Rosen back with Judge Judy Sheindlin. Judge, we asked many of your fans topics they would like to hear you discuss, and one of them is responsibility. So another question that we have is responsibility to yourself. Let's talk about that.
Responsibility to yourself. Well, Gary, you're going to have to be a little more specific with me. You're talking about women, you're talking about men, you're talking about...
Talking about women. Let's talk about women and having it all. What does that mean, women and having it all? Because part of having it all, I would think, you're the woman, is part of it is being responsible and having responsibility to yourself. You have responsibility to kids, maybe to society, maybe to your spouse, but part of it is to yourself.
You know, Gary, my father, who, as most of the people who have watched my interviews over the years know, was my hero when I was growing up. And my father used to say, I'm the trunk of the tree. The trunk of a tree has to be nurtured. If the trunk of a tree isn't nurtured, the leaves die. You can't have a green tree and a crummy trunk. You have to be nurtured. The trunk has to be nurtured. And my father used to say that because my mother would say to him, what do you mean you're playing golf Monday, Wednesday, and Friday afternoon? And he said, I work 4 days a week, 12 hours a day. On the other 3 days, I want 4 hours to myself because that's what I need to reinvigorate myself. I need to nourish that part of me. And so he played golf 3 afternoons a week. Well, men, as we know, are different creatures from women. And women who want to have both a career, lots has been said about that, career as well as a family, very often are told, you really can't have it all. And I am here to tell you that you really can have it all. I don't come from an Ivy League background and not from a particularly privileged background. Although my father was a dentist, we were middle-class people. We lived in Brooklyn on Ocean Avenue. I shared a room with my brother for a long time, and then I shared a room with my grandmother for a long time. We never wanted for anything, but we weren't affluent. I went to a reasonable college. I went to a reasonable law school. I married and lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment. I mean, it wasn't a life of privilege for a very, very long time until I was in my 50s. Did I start to enjoy the fantasy that comes with a career in entertainment. So all during the years that my children were young and I was trying to hone my skills as a lawyer and commute back and forth to work every day and then come home and prepare dinner and had no household help, did my own cleaning. I had a husband who said, I'll help you, but was scarce when that, that time to help came around. He provided, a sort of loving atmosphere in our home. But when it came to doing the work in the home, he was a traditionalist and remains a traditionalist. His father was served by his mother. Mm-hmm. That's what that generation knew, and that's what he knows. And most of the men of his generation know that. So I really didn't have either the first time I was married or the second and third time to Jerry Sheindlin, the kind of supportive mates that very often I see in my children and their friends, where fathers change diapers and they take they take turns on Saturday watching the children. That wasn't the way it was for women of my generation. So if you wanted to succeed, you had to break a sweat in order to do that. And you did it. Certain things, there was a give and take. I remember there was a time when I was a young lawyer who was recently appointed to the bench, and I was on the bench for about a year or two, and was approached by a very successful matrimonial firm in New York City that was really anxious to have a family court judge on their letterhead. and offered me a position, making then considerably more money than I was making as a family court judge. But of course, the hours were more. The work responsibility, although not greater than in the family court, the time commitment. You had to see a client on Saturday or Sunday, or if you had a trial, then you were there until 10 or 11 o'clock at night. You were expected to bring in your percentage of the business. And the truth is, I had to make a judgment. While I loved civil service, that extra $40,000 a year would make a big difference in my family's life. And I said, you have to make certain accommodations. So I stayed on the family court bench. I never looked back. I never regretted it. And while some of my kids say, used to say, why can't you bake the cookies? I said, because I don't have time to bake the cookies. Right. Mrs. Jones can bake the cookies. She doesn't work, and she doesn't support you. I have to work, so I will run out to the supermarket and pick up the Entenmann's cookies, but I can't bake them. And while I'll try to get to your swim meet over lunch, and very often did, drove to work, went to court in the morning, left, ran home an hour, saw them jump in the pool and swim to the other end, and then hop back in my car and got back a little bit late to the afternoon session because I didn't want them not to have a parent there. Right. I couldn't be there for the day. I couldn't be there for the whole experience.
But was there any guilt?
Yes, you do have a certain amount of guilt. But then when I look back at my life today as a whole person, you like to feel as if you leave a certain mark in the world, whatever you do. From whatever job you have, if you do it well, you leave an imprint. You leave an imprint vocationally in your job. You leave an imprint as a parent if you have children. You leave an imprint as a sibling if you are fortunate enough to have siblings. You leave an imprint as a child if you've taken good care of your parents. That's your life imprint. You're supposed to be responsible in all aspects of your life. But to come back full circle, Gary, to your question, the first person who you have to be true to is yourself. If what you want is to have a career and a family, you can do it.
Right. Great. Thank you, Judge.